platform. And we're going to learn that a story can really affect change. It can influence opinion, it can create awareness, and maps are an integral part of that storytelling. And with ArcGIS StoryMaps, you can integrate maps, data, and other multimedia content with text in order to tell a narrative about the world's greatest challenges and highlight or inspire solutions. And this is incredibly powerful, and we need this capability now because we must get going on the Sustainable Development Goals. They are a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet now and into the future. They represent our best opportunity to mobilize the global community to fight against the world's most pressing issues, including poverty, hunger, inequality, climate change, and everything that we are facing with this pandemic. So in this webinar, we are geared toward participants who are going to be entering the 2020 ArcGIS StoryMap competition for the SDGs. But this webinar is indeed open to everyone, and we're so glad to have you. This webinar is part of a larger collaborative effort between ESRI and the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network to encourage and inspire the use of GIS for the SDGs. We're going to also hear about the SDGs Today platform for the timely access to SDG data, as well as the competition. So without further ado now, I'd like to hand over to Jeffrey Sachs, who is going to deliver our welcoming remarks. Hopefully you know who Jeffrey Sachs is. He I think, defies description in terms of needing an introduction, but I would like to introduce him as a world-renowned economist, best-selling author. He's an innovative educator, and he is absolutely a global leader in sustainable development. He is the president of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and he's also the director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. He also serves as an SDG advocate under the UN Secretary General. He's twice been named Time Magazine's 100 most influential among the 100 most influential world leaders, and was ranked by The Economist among the top 3 most influential living economists. So we are very pleased and honored to have Jeffrey deliver some welcome remarks. So Jeffrey, I'm going to hand over to you.
Dawn, thank you very much, and how wonderful to be with you and with Hindu and with all our participants from around the world. I want to thank the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network and of course the partners, ESRI and National Geographic, among many partners, for not only today's session, but for a partnership on bringing geographic information systems, analytics, and data to bear on the Sustainable Development Goals. And let me indeed, in brief remarks, give a little bit of an overview of what we're trying to do. The SDGs, of course, are the globally agreed goals for the year 2030 to achieve sustainable development. And they are in partnership with other UN treaty agreements, and especially the Paris Climate Agreement and the Convention on Biological Diversity, to move the world to sustainable development. What does sustainable development mean? In a nutshell, it means 4 things. 1, economic development around the world so that everybody around the world can share in the benefits of modern technology. 2nd, it means social justice, so that we have societies that are fair, that include everybody, that leave no one behind. 3rd, it means facing our major and growing environmental crises, of which COVID-19 can be counted, because these zoonotic emerging diseases, diseases that transfer from animal populations to human populations are occurring with ever greater frequency, actually, partly because of the environmental disruptions taking place in our world today. And the fourth pillar is good governance that gives us the capacity to face new challenges. And obviously, we don't have enough good governance right now because we're not very effective, whether in the United States or in other parts of the world, in fighting the COVID-19 pandemic, just as one dramatic case. So the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted to address these four pillars: the economic, social, environmental, and governance pillars. And while COVID-19 is both a symptom of our failures in sustainable development, it's also a wake-up call. We've got to get serious. We have to govern ourselves better. We have to use science, knowledge, data, so that we can not only end this pandemic, but also achieve what we have set out to achieve, which is broad-based economic development, ending extreme deprivation, protecting the planet, narrowing inequalities, ensuring gender equality, and greatly reduced income and wealth inequalities. Now, to do this, we need to understand how our social, economic, and environmental and engineered systems work. We live in a system of systems in which socioeconomic changes, demographic changes, environmental changes, technological changes, all drive now major disruption, but also opportunity for progress in the world. And we need to understand these dynamics. And for that, we need to have data. Not just data, but now geographically referenced data, because the dynamics of Earth systems, whether it's climate or disease transmission, the dynamics of economic change, whether it is trade or investment, are driven along geographic lines. And geography also helps us to identify areas of crisis and to identify areas of opportunity. Therefore, in order to promote the use of geographic information systems, the data and the analytics, in order to take on the Sustainable Development Goals, three partners, ESRI, National Geographic, and the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, have joined forces to bring to bear this amazing world of GIS on our urgent needs for sustainable development. Our lead portal for that, and our interface with you, students and practitioners, is the SDGstoday.org website. Our goal is to curate many, many different information system platforms and networks to give us the vantage point to understand the Sustainable Development Goals, and especially to understand them in real time. What is happening now with this fast-moving pandemic? What is happening now with the forest fires raging in many parts of the world, including the US Pacific coastal region? What is happening now with climate change? We're now indicating that 2020 may become, in the end, the warmest year on the instrument record as part of this continuing very dangerous trend of global warming as part of human-induced climate change. What is happening now to hunger in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic and other real-time dimensions of urgency for the Sustainable Development Goals? SDGstoday.org aims to bring together a burgeoning amount of global data and the networks that are curating or developing those data so that we can gain the advantages of rich information and analytics to help guide the Sustainable Development Goals. I would say that there are at least 4 basic purposes of this real-time data. The first is analytical, to understand climate dynamics, forest fire dynamics, biodiversity loss, spread of a pandemic disease such as COVID-19. These are geospatial dynamics, and the real-time data underpins our core analytics. The second purpose is management. To stop the transmission of the virus, we have to know where it is spreading. To stop forest fires, we have to understand where they are and where they're breaking out. To address crises of pests or famine, we have to have real-time information to know where the crisis spots are by harvesting, whether it is big data through Twitter or searches on Google or other kinds of real-time social media, or remote sensing data from satellites or from ground systems. The third point is accountability. Real-time data hold governments accountable. And heaven knows we need to hold our governments accountable, because politicians do not do the right thing much of the time. Alas, in the United States, I think it's most of the time these days at the federal level, they're not doing the right thing. So we need the data to hold governments accountable. A notable event last year came when the Brazilian Space Agency issued a report saying that the deforestation of the Amazon had accelerated. The president, very irresponsibly, very dangerously, very autocratically, fired the head of the agency for issuing that information. But because those data are available worldwide, no president can suppress the worldwide information of what's really happening in the Amazon. So that's where accountability comes in. And the fourth dimension of importance is design, what is called geodesign. And there's a wonderful global geodesign consortium, an international geodesign consortium that is bringing together universities from around the world for designing solutions. Where should we deploy renewable energy? Where should we set aside new lands for biodiversity conservation? How should cities be structured in order to reduce inefficiencies and waste and loss, and to have higher quality of life with more green spaces? These are geodesign questions that need GIS information systems in order to address. So our purpose is, with Esri and National Geographic's incredible, unique global partners and global community of GIS expertise, and with the vast, unimaginable amounts of data on climate, weather, human dynamics that we are now able to harvest by the day, to put the community, the data, and the tools together to accelerate progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. If you look at the SDGs website, you'll see real-time data on food insecurity, of course, on COVID-19 itself, on places where women are leaders in the world, part of SDG 5 on gender equality, on daily air quality, on weekly and monthly CO2 emissions, on forest fires, and many other areas. Now, we want you to use these data and to contribute to the development of a deeper understanding and better data, and more timely data. And part of that, as Dawn emphasized, is storytelling. And so we have opened a competition to have you produce story maps to tell the story of the SDGs or the crises or the failures or the areas of success or good case studies or new geo-design ideas through story maps. That competition will continue open for submission, your submissions, until November 25th. In the chat area, you will find ways to submit your story maps to a global competition. I'm so thrilled to be joined by the co-judges of this competition. We can't wait to see what you come up with. You can also go to SDGs Today website in order to make your story maps submissions. But this is an exciting breakthrough area. Esri and National Geographic and Hindu's great leadership work and many other geographers and GIS specialists are paving a way to a new kind of analytics, a new kind of public sector and private sector management, a new kind of geo-design, and a new kind of activism, frankly speaking, to hold governments and business accountable for what they do through the use of GIS systems. We want you to be involved in that global movement, to learn the tools of the trade, and to contribute your story maps to help the world join in the effort to achieve sustainable development. Thank you so much. I turn it back to Dawn, and so grateful for the partnership.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. Those were excellent remarks. And this has really set the stage for the rest of our webinar. And now you hopefully have a better understanding, everyone, of the SDGs, of our competition, and certainly how we can all contribute to literally saving the world. This is what it's about. And toward that end, I'd like to introduce now another one of the judges of the upcoming Story Maps competition. I'm so very pleased to introduce to you Hindu Omaru Ibrahim. She is from the Republic of Chad in the north central region of Africa. She is an amazing SDG advocate and environmental activist. Hindu is an expert in indigenous peoples' adaptation to climate change, traditional ecological knowledge, and climate change mitigation strategies. She is the co-chair of the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change, and also serves as an SDG advocate under the UN Secretary General. Hindu has founded the Association for Indigenous Women and Peoples of Chad to empower Indigenous voices with collaborative tools, such as 3D participatory mapping, all of this to build sustainable ecosystems management and to reduce nature-based resource conflicts. Hindu is a National Geographic explorer. She has given an amazing TED Talk on Indigenous knowledge in terms of where Indigenous knowledge meets science to solve climate change. And that talk has surpassed more than 1 million views. I have also just recently literally fallen in love with her TED Women talk that was given recently as well. So you can find Hindu all over YouTube, but we are so very pleased to have her with us now to deliver some brief keynote remarks. So Hindu, a warm welcome, and I now turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Dawn. It's really a great pleasure and honor to be with you, with Jeffrey as my SDG advocate and all the other co-chairs. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the participants that joining us here. And this is also the magic of having the technology, how we are meeting now in this very difficult time virtually. So for me, it is really very important to be with you today and talk about the geographical information system storytelling map, and to encourage all the people to use the storytelling to build awareness to this critical time we have all together, the threats we are facing all together, and also how we can integrate the data and maps and aspire the solutions that needed ever in this world. Firstly, I am coming from an indigenous communities, call it Mbororo pastoralist. My people are cattle herders. So we move always from one place to another one to found water and pastures. And that means for us, all our history is based on storytelling. So we pass it from one generation to another one. And it is our daily based learning. For example, in my peoples, so you're supposed to know your 7 past grandpa activities, what they do, who are they, the names. So you have to name your 7 past. And when you think to take any decision, you have to think about the upcoming 7 generations and all that passing through an history of generations, how we can elaborate it, how we can tell it to the others, and how we can build the sustainable world. So the sustainability and also the SDGs we are talking about, it's already integrated in the world life of indigenous peoples. For my peoples that living with the cattle from one place to another one, found in water and pastures in a very fragile ecosystem of the Sahel. So we understand earlier how we can live in harmony with the Mother Earth. So for us, it is very important to respect our rights, yes, but to respect also the right of environment that we are living on it. We are depending on it, and this environment who give us all what we want. When we move from one place to another one, we give the break to the ecosystem to get regenerated in a natural way. And that can help us to come back and again use those resources in a sustainability. And for us, so it's not only that the nature is giving us, we have to give the nature back. And that's all the history around our living in harmony with the nature. But however, we do have the different kind of storytelling. Jeff talked about it on the global level, how it's happened and how it is really important for all of us to have data, to have maps. But I used to say, and of course, Dawn said in my TED Talk, I said that my grandmother is the best app ever. Why? Because she gives us all the history of how we can live in harmony with the nature. She's the best app because she can predict you a weather, if it's going to be raining in the next couple of hours, or if the next rain season after 12 months going to be good for us or not. She can do that just by observing her environment that she's living around, by observing the star positions, the cloud, the wind direction, the birds migration, the insect, by observing her own cattle, how they can lie down and where they can move from, at what time. So from all those observations, she can predict the weather and plan the better resilience of her community. And those knowledge are coming from man, from women, to help our generations of all indigenous peoples to live in harmony with our nature. It is the same for my brothers and sisters in Amazon, where you can find the indigenous land, who is the most fertile and most diverse than a natural park where they put soldiers, the guards and all. And when you go to the Pacific, you can find a grandma who can know after hurricane hitting her communities where to find water, when to find pastures. And all those knowledges are for us just known by our transmissions intergenerationally. And it is telling in our mother tongue. That's why it is also so diverse and very important. But today, as storytelling, it's important to achieve the SDGs, to achieve for all of us the Sustainable Development Goals. I am so happy to be one of the advocates with Jeff and all the rest of the 17 members. But for me, how I can advocate better, it is leaving no one behind, because that is all about it. We cannot have the development, as Jeff explaining, the 4 principles. So we cannot grow up economy by leaving back the indigenous communities or those who are the most vulnerable, the rural areas, the local communities, or the peoples with disability or young peoples on all. So we have to include everyone and each in all the decisions we are taking. But yet, it is so difficult to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal even before the pandemic of the COVID for the region like mine, the Sahel regions, because we are hitting very hardly by climate change in our daily base. It is not only reading it in the reports that giving how it's impacting the world, but it is coming also from the data that we have. And I give you the example of the data of Lake Chad. Lake Chad, who used to be the bigger freshwater lake in my regions, in 1960 used to have 25,000 kilometers squares of the freshwater. And now actually it's just about 2,000 kilometers squares. So 90% of the water just evaporated. And around the lake, you have more than 40, 50 million people living and depending from this fragile ecosystem. They do not depend from the end of the month salaries. They depend from the rainfall. If they get a water, if they get a pastures, they can fish or they can farm or they can move around as my people. But this created a conflict between the communities, because when the resources shrink, so people fight to get access to the piece of fertile land or to the access to the fresh water. And that creates a big difficulty for the peoples, adding poverty to poverty every day. And this is the SDG number 1. Normally we're supposed to achieve it all together. And the other example is around the milk production for us. You know, when I was young, I'm still young, of course, when I was a kid, so we have to milk 2 times every day during the rain season and once every day during the dry season. But now we milk during the dry season only 1 time every 2 days. And the reason is the first day we leave the milk for the baby cow to breathe. And then the second, we have the milk for ourselves. So we try to manage between how we can feed our cattle, sustain them, and how we can have the milk for our survival ourselves. And all this coming from the climate change impact. And it's creating a conflict among the communities and dividing the society. And that's mean, so people need to migrate or force displace because of the natural resources shrinking. We have a lot of internal displaced communities around the regions. And we do have also suddenly the international migrant. So they don't have anything else to do. They do not see the future that's desirable for them. They have to cross the borders and sometimes jump in the sea and go to the Europe. And when I see through news, it is very sad, yes, to have the European peoples hosting the migrant that coming. But if they think about the responsibility of what they did to create the climate change that create the suffering for the communities where they do not have a future for them, if they think about those who are left behind, the women, the children who have to fight, who have to innovate every day for them survival. So it is really adding a problem in a problem every day. And that means the seasons are changing a lot for us. We do not recognize them anymore. But storytelling and data can be also a big source of solutions for all the problems that I highlight here. Like now, when we have the COVID, we are seeing that what science tells us earlier. if we destroy nature, we destroy our health, we destroy our food, we destroy our environment. So this pandemic or other pandemic that can come, if we do not protect the nature, will be the same from the story that indigenous people said and from the science that give us data. That's why it is very important to rely on all the data that exists we do have and all the story that indigenous people said to build our better futures and resilience. You know, when you see the forest burn, maybe for some people saying that it's just a forest, it's sad to see it through the TVs. But for indigenous communities, it is home that's burning. It is food that's burning. It is medicine that's burning. So it is all our culture, our identity. And we now all know we cannot resolve the climate solution even if we stop all the fossil fuel. We need to add the nature-based solutions. And what the peoples call the nature-based solution for indigenous peoples, it's our way of living. It's our way of living with harmony with the nature. So we know that forests, oceans, mountains, savannas, all can create a 30% at least or more of the solution to fight climate change. So we need to map them. We need to see how we can restore it. We need to see how we can live together in all different ecosystems. And I finish by giving you the example of how I use the mapping to help my communities and to work with other indigenous peoples, to build awareness, to make it tools, and to give also the policymaker how they can take a better solutions. This is called the 3D participatory mapping. So this based on a geographical information that exists already and the traditional knowledge of indigenous communities. It doesn't matter that community didn't went to school. It doesn't matter that they do not know how to read, how to write. They can do it. We can put the science knowledge, traditional knowledge together and build a data. So when we have the 3D participatory mapping, we put men and women and children together. They build it over 2 weeks and they put all the knowledges. At the end of the day, it's helped us to give a map with clear information where people can know where are the corridors of transhumance, where are the water points, where are the farm places, where are the sacred forests, and it's helped to better plan the management of the natural resources. So it's so amazing for me. It's really the best tools that I have to put the traditional knowledge and science knowledge together and see how it can give us a magical solutions who include everyone, who do not leave some peoples behind, but who put all the peoples in the same place, who resolve conflict and who can give a hope. So all of us can use the geographical information, we can use the data, but we need to access them, and we need to access them in an equitable way. We need to understand them in the language that we have. And if we design it for the global peoples, it can work really well. It can give us the hope that we are looking for a long time. And we can see how we can transform our future, not for the future generation only, but for the next 7 upcoming generations, as we are saying in my community and in many other indigenous communities. I'm so happy to be with all of you here. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you so much, Hindu. That was powerful. It was insightful. It was inspiring, encouraging. It's just what we need to hear. And to that end, this is being recorded, of course, on YouTube, and you can find this program again on the SDSN YouTube channel. And it will be very important to revisit Hindu and Jeffrey's remarks and to be inspired by this as a way forward. I love how Hindu talked about data and maps as a language, as a means of storytelling through the generations, 7 generations, And thank goodness for our grandmothers, indeed. I was raised in the Polynesian culture, and our tutus, as we say, are they are the best apps that we have. We need a way forward in terms of working with the technology, though, in order to tell these powerful stories. And so I'm very happy now to transition to our StoryMaps team for a demo. And you'll notice also in the bottom of your Zoom window that there is a Q&A button, and I see that there's some questions that have been submitted already. But you'll want to use that Q&A button to submit questions about what you're going to see and hear in the demos that we are transitioning to now. So please submit your questions in that box, and then we will have a question and answer session with all of you afterwards. But before my colleagues come to the Zoom stage, I want to introduce them because I'm very, very proud of them. I'm so excited to work with them, especially as an advocate and a user of StoryMaps myself. As chief scientist, the StoryMap platform is one of the most powerful science communication platforms that we have, and certainly for telling the stories of these SDGs. You're going to be hearing from Alan Carroll, who is the program manager for storytelling at Esri. Alan founded Esri's StoryMaps team, which, as you know, develops the web tools that enable hundreds of thousands of us and our organizations to tell place-based stories that combine interactive maps and multimedia content. He leads an editorial team that publishes StoryMaps and supports a global community of storytellers. Thank goodness Alan came to us from the National Geographic. He was the chief cartographer at the National Geographic for 27 years, but he is now with us at Esri, and he and his team are doing some amazing things, as you'll see. You'll also hear from Liz Todd, who is a multimedia specialist and product engineer on Esri's StoryMaps team. She specializes in community-based GIS and storytelling and uses place-based storytelling to elevate and empower voices with a focus on leveraging GIS for equity and social justice. She previously worked for the National Audubon Society as a Dangerman GIS and Climate Fellow, and we are so very happy. She is fairly new to Esri, and we are so very happy to have captured her on our StoryMaps team. And finally, you'll hear from Jennifer Bell, who is the product manager for ArcGIS StoryMaps. And she has created literally hundreds of maps and stories over the past 6 years that she has been at Esri. She is super passionate about improving the storytelling experience and advocating for ArcGIS StoryMaps authors and readers. And be careful, because you will be absolutely enchanted. So now I am so very pleased to hand over now to my colleagues to do their sequences of demos over the next several minutes. And thank you very much, Alan. I'm going to pass over to you and to the.
I'm suddenly not hearing anything. Hello?
We can hear you, Alan.
Okay, great. Whew, it scared for a minute. Thanks so much, Dawn. It's a real thrill to be here. We're so excited to think that our tools can be used by you to tell the really important stories about the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm going to share my screen and just jump right into it. I'm going to just briefly describe what a story map is. I think most of you have some familiarity with them. Then give you a quick look at a sample SDG story and provide a few general tips about storytelling. So ArcGIS StoryMaps combine interactive maps. They're hosted on Esri's cloud service. There are thousands and thousands of them out there in the ArcGIS ecosystem. Combined with multimedia content, so your photos, videos, audio, and text, of course, to tell stories about the world. And there are now close to 1.5 million story maps out there, telling stories at all scales, from neighborhood to planet spanning narratives, and of course on all sorts of topics. They're viewable on a variety of screen sizes, so it's best to author them on large screens, but you can view them just as easily on tablets and mobile devices as on large screens. We think story maps are the ideal medium for telling the stories of the SDGs. They might not be quite as effective as Hindu's grandmother, but we think they're pretty close at any rate. And of course, the SDGs represent a huge array of important topics and issues. I'm going to choose just a subset of the climate action one. This story was produced by NOAA in partnership with Old Dominion University and a little help from our team at Esri on coastal flooding. I won't dwell on the story itself, but just think of this as an example of the kinds of combination of multimedia content that you can incorporate. So of course you can incorporate text, as I mentioned, images, whether they're infographics or photographs, video clips, etc. The basic experience is a scrolling one. You can also format text in various ways, including quote blocks. And then story maps, one of the really cool things about story maps is that it's got these immersive blocks or sections that allow you to do different things, like take a map tour that goes from place to place, describes in brief text what that place is about, depicts it in photographs, and locates it on a map. Scrolling on down, you can of course include full screen maps that are fully interactive, that themselves contain loads and loads of information. But you can also, scrolling down a little farther, you can also use a swipe tool to compare two maps or two different data layers of a single map, as well as compare images like then and now images. This is what we call the sidecar immersive block, and this allows you, along with some of the other immersives, to do what we call map choreography. So you can sequentially expose different layers of a multi-layer web map that turn that map into a kind of running narrative. You can also change the zoom level to a larger or smaller scale. And you can use these items called map actions to zoom you back in to show details within a single community in this case, but again to expose different layers of maps and also go from maps to images, etc. So that's a very, very quick tour. We're going to go in much greater detail as to about the various sections and functions of story maps and how they work in the within our builder function. But first, having been telling stories with maps for going on, oh my God, like 4 decades, I've given a little bit of thought about good storytelling. So it's one thing to know how to use the builder. It's quite another to think about how to tell a good story. And it's really important to do a lot of careful thinking about a story. It is possible to kind of throw a story together, but the hard part, but also the most rewarding part, is the careful thought and techniques you can use to bring your story to life. So number one in a list of 9 bits of advice is to start with a bang. So come up with a title, we hope, that's evocative and interesting, and start with an image or images that really kind of grab the reader and lure the reader into the story. Second, and by the way, not all of these are going to apply to every story. These are just general guidelines. But second is to add a hero. And what I mean by that is that if you can people your story with people, it's much better that way. People love people. They can relate to other people. People can provide the sort of color and individuality to stories that otherwise might be kind of abstract and dry. Another technique I use quite a bit is to add a rhythm to your story. So to come up with a kind of repeating structure. Again, this doesn't work in all cases, but it can provide a sort of comforting rhythm to a story and help sort of move people through a narrative. Fourth is to create a little world. The idea here is to come up with a sort of unified editorial approach, but especially a graphic approach. So in this case, I've limited the color palette We have various font choices that can allow you to create a really unified look and feel. And it's important to not simply embed maps, but think about how that map design, which you can adjust in ArcGIS Online and in other ways, can sort of align with the overall look and feel of your story, so that those many multimedia elements combine into a seamless whole. Another is to think about the various sizes in which the story is going to, the screen sizes that the story is going to be viewed in. Our builder does a lot of work to kind of optimize for various screen sizes, but it's important for you to test your story on a variety of screen sizes to make sure it's effective across all those platforms. Another one I use a lot is to think big and think small, not in terms of screen size in this case, but in terms of going from a global level, sort of a macro level, down to a neighborhood or local level, an individual level, again, perhaps using people as examples. And that mix of the overview and the colorful detail is what is one of the things that can really engage people. Second, of course, is to use maps. We'd like to sort of minimize the notion that you can create a story without any maps. But of course, we think maps are really powerful, both in terms of interactive maps and static maps. So sometimes static maps can work fine in terms of simple locators and things. Number 8, keep it short and sweet. So we all get passionate about our topics, and a story map can start to get longer and longer. But given the nature of the digital medium and the ease at which users can click away, it's best to be short and sweet with your storytelling. And then finally is to end your story with a call to action. If you've inspired somebody through your narrative, you don't want to just kind of leave them hanging. You want to give them things to do. It might be as simple as links to more information or to an organization website, but it might also be a way to donate or volunteer or sign a petition or get involved in various ways. So that's a few bits of advice. And now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Liz, who's going to start to drill down into a little more detail. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Alan. Hey, Alan, would you mind stop sharing your screen?
I will stop sharing.
Thank you. So as Alan mentioned, I'm going to talk to you today in a little more detail, and I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and I'm going to introduce you to the StoryMaps builder and talk to you a little bit about getting started with ArcGIS StoryMaps. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to esri.com/StoryMaps, and when this loads, it's going to take us to our product page where you can find high-level information about ArcGIS StoryMaps and more information about the products. It also has this really nifty Explore Stories tab where we have curated galleries that are updated weekly of what the team is reading, and also has a section where you can browse different albums of stories by topic, so you can see what folks with similar organizations or even your colleagues are doing with ArcGIS StoryMaps. One of my favorite parts about this page, though, is our resources section, which has tips and tricks on storytelling best practices. And it also has this really great build your skills area that includes information about everything we've released in the last release, any new updates. Also, it has information about different blogs, tutorials, articles that the team is working on, and also video recordings to any webinars that we may have done recently, like this StoryMaps Live that happened in September. To get started, I'm going to go ahead and launch ArcGIS StoryMaps, and I'm going to do so by clicking this button up in the upper right-hand corner of my screen, and it's going to log me in directly to my stories page. Now, if you're not logged in ahead of time like I am, it will prompt you to log in, so just go ahead and put in your credentials, and then you'll be able to get to all of your information. So right now you're viewing my stories. This is just a repository of all of the ArcGIS StoryMap stories that I've made. You can tell the different state of them. If you take a look at these turquoise cards up at the top that say published, that means the story is published and will tell me which sharing level it's published to. If it has an orange card that says draft, it will let me know that I've not yet published it. And some of them even have this really great purple card that tells me it has unpublished changes. And so my story may be published publicly. However, there might be changes in the back end or in the builder that I've yet to make public. And that's a really handy thing to know when I have stories that need to be updated monthly, or I want to make sure I'm keeping evergreen with the newest information and data. So I'm going to go ahead and get started by clicking this new story button up here at the top. As you can see, there are a few different options to get started. I can start from scratch, or I can choose a quick start template. And these quick start templates are a newer feature. They're really incredible because they preload one of our immersive blocks that you choose directly into your story. So you kind of get a jump on the storytelling process. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and start from scratch. And so once you launch the building, you're automatically hit by this great prompt, and it says title your story. I'm going to call this SDGs demo, and I'm going to choose a cover image or video. And so I've gone ahead and I've created a folder with demo information and multimedia for this. And I'm going to use this really beautiful photo of an iceberg that I took a couple of years ago. And so while that's loading, I can see that, maybe this cover option isn't the best for this picture. I can go in and change where it's focusing on, but I'm actually going to go ahead and change the cover design. And so I click up here at the design option at the top, and I can choose to have a cover that's side by side or a cover that's full. I'm going to choose the full cover. I think it's more immersive. It pulls your reader in really, really quickly. And then I can also choose to change my theme here. As you can see, we have 6 pre-baked themes. These are automatically optimized for accessibility, but we also now have the option to create a new theme. So themes will change the cover, they'll change the background, they'll change the accent color, they'll change the font, but you can also create your own using Theme Builder if you click Manage. And I know Jen's going to talk a little bit more about that later. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and select a theme that I made a little while ago using the colors from the pictures I'm going to use in the demo today, and show you that when you use theme builders and you make a custom theme, it's a really great way to either incorporate your organization's visual toolkit or to create a really consistent visual language throughout your story. So now I've scrolled down to the body of my story, and you see this little prompt saying add to your story. I'm going to click this button, and it's going to open up what we call the block palette, which is broken down into 4 main components. You have your text option, then you have your graphics options like buttons and separators. Then we have a multimedia section that includes things like images, videos, and audio. And then we have our immersive blocks like slideshow, map tour, swipe, and sidecar. And I've actually already pre-made a story that will help us move through this demo a little quickly. So I'm going to go back over to my content, and I'm going to open up this story called SGD, Storytelling for the SDGs demo. As you can see, I've already applied my theme, and we have that same cover image. And now I'm going to click Edit Story at the upper right-hand side and scroll down. And let's talk about the basic building blocks of ArcGIS StoryMaps. So the first thing that most of your reader is going to see aside from your image is going to be text. And so when you want to add text, you go up here in the block palette, you click text, and I'm going to just add in some text. So this is text. And if I want to do some quick changes, I can just highlight that text and either turn it into a heading, or maybe I want to make it a subheading. But in this case, I might actually want to make it just a numbered list, and I'm not sure I love that color. So I can change the color right here, and I can also make it bold or italics if I want to. One of my favorite portions of text or ways to use text is to use the quote block. And so I'm going to go ahead and highlight it and turn it into a quote. Quote blocks are great for pulling your reader's attention to a specific portion of your text, or even just breaking up the flow of your story so it's not just an endless scroll. But these are the basic building blocks of text, and it's up to you how you customize and create a story that's unique to you. The next thing I want to chat with you about are graphics. So like I mentioned, these are your buttons or your separators. You go up into the block palette and you click separator. And so separators are just a little graphic that pop up in your story. They look different depending on the theme, and they're an incredible way to have a nice visual indicator to move on. You're moving on to a different section in your story, or they're just a good way to create space if you need it. As Alan mentioned, we also have an incredible option to add a button. And so buttons allow you to have a call to action. So you could do something like learn more, and then direct your audience or reader to a website where they could learn more about your incredible subject or topic. I've actually pre-configured a button, and it's going to take us to the SDGs today. And so the SDGs today is a global hub for real-time SDG data. And this is going to be immensely useful when you're trying to tell your SDG today story. You can click on any of these cards to learn more and see data. I'm going to explore SDG 13 and look at global temperature data, or maybe sea ice, and see that we've pulled in some really incredible NOAA temperature data, and also that I can access it either by clicking the Access Data button or looking more at official data at the bottom. And this applies for all of the SDGs, and I would encourage you to use it as a resource, but also to look more into it as you begin to tell your story. Now that I'm hopping back into the builder, I want to go ahead and tell you a little bit about how you add multimedia. So one of the great things about ArcGIS StoryMaps is it allows you to incorporate media, photos, audio in a way that provides a really immersive wrap for your maps or your information. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add an image. We're going to go back to my handy dandy demo multimedia folder, and I'm going to pick a picture of penguins that I took on my same trip. And you know, when you first add a story, when you add an image to your story, it adds itself in line with your text, but you can make it medium-sized or even large. And a really useful option is this float option, which floats it to the left of any text you may have. But for now, I'm just going to leave it centered. And then I think it'd be super helpful for my audience or readers to understand what being near a penguin colony sounds like. So I'm actually going to add some audio. And so I have this great audio of penguins, and hopefully when somebody reads this, they'll click the play button and they'll be able to hear what a penguin colony sounds like. So a story would not be complete without a map, and place-based storytelling is a really great way to augment your narrative. And so I'm going to go ahead and click add a map. When you're adding a map, there's 3 different main ways to add information or data to your story. The first is you can look at the maps in your maps. So this is the maps that you've made. And as you can see, I have one about iceberg locations. I have some SDG live survey data that you'll see later on. Or I can go into Living Atlas and maybe search for that NOAA temperature data we just looked for. And look at that, it's right there. But in this moment, I'm actually going to make a new Express map. And Express maps are an incredible way to just kind of add information on the fly, but also create really beautiful and simple maps. So I'm going to go ahead and add a point to this map, and I'm going to add it just somewhere on the Antarctic Peninsula. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add an image. Maybe we'll pick this nice image of whales and we'll call it whales. And I'm going to just go ahead and now I'm going to add a line. So I also have, I want to zoom in here, but I also have some information about the path that I took to get there. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a line from Ushuaia all the way over to the Antarctic Peninsula. And now that I've added that, I can go ahead and I can bend my line because I obviously didn't go through the middle of that island. And if I wanted, I could even add an annotation. And so I could click here and say our path, and then pull in an information. And so while this isn't the prettiest map, I think you get the idea. Express maps give you the opportunity to create amazing and kind of instantaneous maps that even let you add things like arrows, which usually take a lot of time elsewhere. But for now, we're also going to move over and talk about embeds. So one of the great features about ArcGIS StoryMaps is that you can embed information. And so you can either do this one of 2 ways when you're embedding it. You go over here and you click the embed option, and you can either create a custom iframe that allows you to specify different parameters for your embed, or you can go ahead and just paste in information directly. Right now, I'm going to embed some information about Antarctic base map layers. As you can see, this comes in directly as a card in card view. and it looks really pretty. We have a title, some information, and an image. If I wanted to, I could make this embed in a interactive view where the reader could directly interact with that page. However, that's a bit overwhelming, so I'm just going to default back to card view for now. And with that, I want to spend some time chatting with you about the different special blocks that ArcGIS StoryMaps has, things like slideshow, swipe, sidecar, and map tour. So the first thing we're going to add is we're going to add a slideshow. And slideshows are really great for adding media or maps that are really immersive. I'm going to go ahead and add an image here, and we're going to take this image of an iceberg that I took. And as it loads, I'm going to title it, hey, this is ice. And I don't love where that's sitting because it's right on the tip of the iceberg. So I'm going to move this down, and maybe I'll change my panel appearance so that you can see the water. I also want to call attention to the fact that Antarctica is a landmass and a continent, so it might not just be ice. So I'm going to add some images of a mountain in Antarctica as well. And so now we have, this is a mountain. And I think I'm going to move this over to the side and then maybe move it down again. And all of a sudden we have an experience where your reader can move horizontally through information and see some really immersive images or maps that you have. Now let's take a deep dive into Swipe. Swipe is one of my favorite immersive blocks that we offer. You can add an image or a web map. In this case, I'm going to show you the difference between a black and white photo and a color photo of some icebergs that I saw. This is one of my favorite images because you see the really the contrast between old and young icebergs. And you can scroll in between and just generally play around. They're really fun and they're great for showing changes over time. If you want to show where you've been on your journey or emphasize different regions, Map Tour is a great way to do that. So when you open up Map Tour, you have the option to have either a guided map tour or an explorer map tour. So a guided tour allows your readers to kind of move through a list of places in a specific order that you preset, but an explorer tour allows your readers to move through any kind of points on a map that you may have at their own leisure in their own order. I'm going to go ahead and add a guided tour, and it's going to prompt me to add either map focused or media focused. Map focused guided tours are great if you have really incredible map data that you want to highlight, or media focused tours are incredible if you want to add some really beautiful multimedia or videos. I'm going to go ahead and pick media focused. I love the little locator map up at the top. And so I'm going to go in and click add location, and we're going to go to somewhere on the Antarctic Peninsula. And this is way too zoomed out for me. So I want to zoom in, and maybe we'll pull this over to this side and set a custom zoom level. I'm going to add my location to the map. Now I'm going to add an image from this. I have this great image of somebody taking a video of penguins, which seems to be a consistent theme in most of my pictures. And so we can say this is a photographer, and we can add another point on the tour. First, I'm going to add an image here. I'm going to add an image of a baby penguin. And now I'm going to add the location. I saw this penguin when I was in Port Lockroy. So I'm going to search Lockroy up at the search function and add it to map and add a custom zoom level. Port Lockroy is actually the southernmost post office in the world, which is one of my favorite facts. And so now if we scroll through this, my reader can jump around to different parts of my journey. The last immersive block I want to talk with you about is Sidecar. Sidecar offers a really great vertical scrolling experience. If you have really immersive maps and media, you're going to want to use a floating panel. But in this case, I'm going to use a docked panel because I want to add in some text. So this is text. And I also want to add in an image here on the side. This is one of my favorite images of an iceberg. And to accompany with it, I'm going to add a map. of some really great historic iceberg locations data that John Nelson has made look much more beautiful than I could. And so when this loads, I'm going to place it. And so now my reader can see information about historic icebergs location and also see that there's ice as well. And I can go in and add another slide and say, you know, not only is there ice, but there are, once again, penguins. And I'm going to add in a penguin image of this kind of row of penguins I saw that always stood out to me. And because I want to emphasize how noisy penguins are, I'm going to go ahead and add background audio. And so I'm going to add my penguin noise again. And so this audio will automatically play as my reader scrolls to this slide in my sidecar. And so now we've kind of taken a journey through the major points of ArcGIS StoryMaps and the block. The last thing I want to hit on is make sure that you're adding your credit section and that you have attribution. I've added an example of what an image attribution might look like, and I've actually added an attribution for my penguin noise because that was not something that I had on hand. And with that, I'd like to toss it over to Jen so she can dive in and tell you all about storytelling best practices and kind of the why behind all of these different tools.
Thank you, Liz. That was really great. I feel like this is very easy because of your demo. So can you see this screen, the title of your story screen, just to make sure?
Yes, we've got it, Jennifer.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. All right. So I want to tell a story with all of you today, and this story is about women in leadership. And we've seen many women in leadership here in this call today. And this story is about Sustainable Development Goal number 5. And I want this story to catch people's attention. I want to add an image that represents women fighting for representation in leadership, especially in politics. Now, I want to start the story with a short introduction. We like to keep it short and sweet. People's attention spans are about 7 seconds these days with stories. People on average will spend about 10 minutes per story. So that's really great way to tell your story and have people actually read it and digest it and understand the message. Now, right now I'm adding the introduction section, and this is about SDG 5, achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls. And I want to make this a little interesting by adding a GIF. And it's a little bit too big here, so I'm going to move this around. And now I like this layout. I like how the story is starting. I feel like if I was a reader, I would be interested in this. Gender equality is not only a fundamental human right, but it's a necessary base for a peaceful, prosperous, and a sustainable world. And if people aren't taking the time to read everything, that's okay. That happens. We skim all the time. We only have certain amount of time in our days. But for the people who are skimming, I want to include something that's calling out a specific target in the SDG. This is target 5.5, ensuring women's full and effective participation in decision-making processes and leadership in all parts of life, from political to economic to public spheres. So this is the focus of the story today, women in leadership. And before I move on, I want to change the design of the story. We can, with a click of a button, change the tone or the theme. When you see this, you feel a certain way, and things look a little different depending on which theme you select. But I'm really inspired by this SDG 5 red, and I've created an SDG 5 theme. So when I add that, everything automatically changes, and now there's this coherent feeling. It feels like there's a lot of unity in the design of this story. Now, if you are interested in Theme Builder, maybe you want to embed your story in a website and you want the style to match your website. You can do so with the Theme Builder. And we'll dive right into the SDG 5 one that I created. And you can change things like the story header, the background colors. Again, the whole point of doing this is to set the tone, to match your organization's branding. You can add custom hex colors, change the font. There's some really fun ones to check out. And what I really like changing are the elements in the story. The buttons, maybe I want a harsh edge or soft rounded corners. Like Liz said, the quotes are also one of my favorite things to add to stories. They're just so fun, but I like this one because it's very dramatic and it's calling something out. The separator lines, it could be a full width, a thin minimalist line. I like this cute little one here. And then you can add your organization's logo, which you see at the top left of the story. When the reader clicks on the logo, it'll take you to your site. And I love this alternative text. Now, this is a great way to make your story more accessible because whatever you type in here is going to be read out with a screen reader for people who are using screen readers. So you can add alternative text to all your media that you're uploading or linking to, such as images and videos. So that's the theme builder. So now I want to continue my story. I've added some text and some GIFs. I want to change it up by adding a video. So all I'm doing is pasting a link from YouTube. You can paste a link from Vimeo. You can upload a video. And depending on how dramatic you want it, you can make it small, medium, or full screen. In this case, I'll stick with the small. And this is a video that talks about gender equality and how gender equality is not just for SDG 5. It spans every single SDG, all 17 goals, in every single goal as a target. So this is really important. Without gender equality, we can't achieve sustainability, right? All right, so that's my introduction. I'm going to use a little separator to visually indicate the reader, okay, we're moving from one section to the next. So it is called Story Maps. However, you don't always have to have a story or have to have a map in your story map. I'm a geographer. I love maps. And so, of course, I'm always going to include one whenever it makes sense to. So the Living Atlas and the SDGs today, they have such amazing data. The Living Atlas is calling the SDGs today data. And I just typed in women, and there's a lot of maps about women. You know, about the population in general, teen birth rates, education, life expectancy, the economy, you know, jobs. This is just an amazing set of data. It's very curated and trusted. All right, so this is one about women in Parliament, women representation in government. I'm gonna add a little legend in the bottom left just to help readers understand what the map is saying. All right, so this particular map shows the representation of women in government, and it's updated monthly. And we see here in the text that Rwanda, Cuba, and Bolivia, these three countries tend to have the highest percentages of women in government. So the pink ones are above 50%, that's considered high. And then the bluish ones are 14% or less, the bright blues. So for reference, for example, the US has 27.6% of the government is represented by women. All right, so what I want to do is highlight these three countries that are doing really well in terms of percentage of female parliament members. So I'll duplicate this particular slide 3 times, one for each country. And what we're going to do is map choreography. It's like a dance, all right? So here's the first slide. We're zoomed out to the global level. The second slide, we want to go to Rwanda and highlight the location. All right, it's nice and centered. Now place the map. Next, on slide number 3, I want to highlight Cuba. And I love this base map. It's called Firefly, and it's so beautiful and so fun to work with. Bolivia is the last country I'll highlight. I wish I could highlight them all. All right, so let's start from the very beginning, just so you can see what we just did. So the reader's scrolling down. We're on slide number 1 right now. As they're scrolling, it automatically zooms for them to areas of interest. And this is, I highly recommend this kind of workflow or methodology because it doesn't put the burden on the readers to know exactly where to click, to know what's interesting, right? So that was a little journey throughout the different countries we want to highlight. And lastly, I want to add a map action. And this will take people back to zoom to the global view. And we'll edit the map, zoom out a couple, center it. And now if someone starts, say from slide 2, and they're scrolling down, they're going to every single country, and they want to zoom back out, they simply click on this button and it takes them back to the global view where they can continue exploring on their own if they like. All right, so now let's add another section. We're going to add the impact section. Now, we have the intro, and it was talking about global equity. And now I want to talk about impact. So let me add some text. I'm copying and pasting using this auto hotkey tool. So that's why I'm looking down at my notes. Now, I want to add a navigation section. So place your eyes or look at the top of the screen when I turn this on. So now we have bookmarks that take us to different parts of our story. And this is really helpful for people to see where you are in the process and to jump to parts of interest as well. I'm just going to shorten these bookmarks so it looks nice and tidy and short and sweet at the top. It doesn't change anything down here, but it does still connect. So now let's talk about impact. Why is it important? So before I move on, there is very strong evidence that women's representation in governments, especially local governments, have made such a big difference in drinking water access, child health, pensions, funding for education, and much, much more. And this benefits everybody, men and women. All right, so I'm going to add a sidecar. And this time let's go with the docked panel. And I'll change it up by flipping the panel to the right side and add some text. Now I want to highlight in this impact section why gender equity is so important. And I want to show two examples highlighting 2 different countries. The first country you want to highlight is India. And I'll add a flag here. So in India, there's research that's been done, and it discovered that the number of drinking water projects in areas with female-led councils was 62% higher than those with male-led councils, and everyone benefits from clean drinking water. Next, I'll add another sidecar slide, and this is going to highlight Norway. So the text is coming in. So there's a direct causal relationship between having women in municipal councils and childcare coverage. Again, childcare coverage benefits both men and women, especially when it comes to working, participating in their jobs. Now this flag is being cut off a little bit at the top, so I'll move the focus, the focal point, and look to the right. Story maps look good on any device, on mobile, on tablet, on desktop. So you can see what is going to show up in on different screen sizes here. All right, so we have India. And notice how the picture fades in, and then on the right, the text is scrolling. So it changes up the format of the story. It keeps people's attention. All right, the next section. Let's go on to barriers. So this is the part of the story where we start talking about the problems. You know, every good story starts with an introduction. Why is it important? The impact. So hopefully in the section, you know, you've convinced the readers this is something you really should care about. Now this is the climax of the story, the barriers. What's the problem? What is the hero's journey? What is something we're facing, we're all facing? So let's add some text. And bear with me, when I paste in a large paragraph, it takes a little bit of time with the auto hotkey system I'm using. And I want to make this a subheading just to call it out a little bit more. All right, so one of the barriers is the electoral system. There's the proportional representation system, and this is where women's representation is highest. But then we have the majoritarian system, and this is where it only allows for the nomination of one candidate per district. And it tends to be the case that these parties are overwhelmingly choosing male candidates. Another one is political parties as gatekeepers. So this has something to do with the structure, the organization, the internal culture of political parties. Next, we have another barrier to women in leadership, to gender equality, which is campaign environments. So many campaign environments favor people who can spend a lot of time traveling on the campaign trail or being away from home and family for long periods of time, people with large amounts of financial resources. So you can see that there may be some imbalance in who this is affecting. And the last one I want to share is general discrimination and unconscious bias. I'll wait for the text to come in. You know it's going to be a long paragraph. All right. So there are subtle ways, but many real ways that this general discrimination and unconscious bias appears. And let me turn this into a bullet so we can walk through them very quickly. Women don't self-nominate as much as men do in many parts of life, from work to government to home. Women generally have fewer connections to relevant networks. These networks are, politician networks, media, industry donors, things like that. Women endure much more public scrutiny over their looks, their voice, their marital history. And lastly, but not least, women are interrupted more often than men are during campaign debates, media interviews, press junkets, and men are twice as likely as women to run uncontested. So those are the barriers. And I know this is hard to hear sometimes, and it's something that hopefully, we see this, we understand it, we understand the importance, and we are doing something about it with the SDG 5 and more. Now, as Liz showed earlier, she also loves the swipe tool. It's one of my favorite as well. So please bear with me while I add a couple images. You can add 2 images, 2 maps, compare, change over time. You can also compare who's in the room and who's not in the room. These are rooms where it happens, where decisions are made. I'll add a couple more similar themed swipe images. Yeah, this really shows the striking imbalance, validates people's lived experiences, and maybe proves to certain people who never really saw that this way. All right, I'll add one more. This is going to be a slightly bigger room full of slightly more people. This is the last one I'll add before moving on to the next section, hopefully a section of hope. You're at the climax of the story, you're realizing this is a horrible situation, but the next section will be hopeful. I mean, just look at this. So let's do something about it, right? All right, so the next section. This is a section on increasing representation. So you might be wondering, oh, what can I do about it? Well, let's first talk about what can countries do about it? What can current governments do about this? And we'll add a paragraph. Another long one. Here we go. All right, so certain things we can do. Educate citizens about good governance so people can hold their governments accountable. Let me add a quick image here, an image of hope. This is happening. There are women representing their constituents, representing their communities. Infuse civic engagement and ethics into the curriculum, into education. Let's rethink how current political operations, from redistricting, placement of polls, electoral thresholds, and much more, maybe ensuring that women in office receive equitable administrative support, guidance, adequate financial resources, all to do their jobs more effectively. And again, we see this at the top whenever we add a heading. So this is going to be called increase representation. All right, so we've talked about gender equity, why it's important, the barriers to gender equity, how countries can increase representation. Next, for all of you here today, let's talk about what can you do right now to improve gender equity. And again, this looks good already. I'm not going to change it in the navigation. And something I recommend for you when you create a story is maybe, include a survey, right? So I have a survey 1, 2, 3 here, and I can easily embed the survey. You can embed a dashboard, a survey, a website. And in the story, when people are reading your story and they see the survey, they can automatically interact with the survey and complete it here in the story. They don't have to leave. But in this webinar's case, I think Liz is going to paste that link into the chat. And I want you to take some time, click on the link, whether you're on a mobile device or on tablet or desktop. It'll work for all devices. Click on that link and fill out the survey. It's only 2 questions, and it'll take you maybe 20 seconds to do it. All of your responses will show up here in this map. So place the map. And the survey asks, how do you feel, in this current moment about the current state of women in government? It could be how you feel now, might not be how you felt yesterday or tomorrow, or how you're going to feel tomorrow, but how do you feel right now? Maybe it's hopeful, right? And zoom to a certain place in the world, very generalized location. I'm in Redlands, California. I'm originally from Atlanta, so maybe I'll add Atlanta. And then hit submit. All right. So here are the results. Oh, I see a lot coming in. Actually, I'm going to wait a little bit before exploring this. I'm going to give people a little more time. So while you do that, let me add the rest of the text to finish out this section of what you can do right now. So I'll just give you some time. Right now I'm adding a few call to actions. As Alan stated, a great story always ends with a call to action, especially if people made it to the end of your story and they're still interested. They want to know, what can I do? How can I learn more? So here are some quick call to actions. Oops, that was a duplicate. Here we go, and I'll do some quick editing to give you a little bit more time as well. All right, highlight, bold, change the color. When you change the color like this, people who are skimming, they'll at least see the most important part of your words, right? And I'll just change a couple more, and I'm really excited to go back to that map and see what all of you are saying. Educate younger generation. And one more thing before we go back to the map. All right. So let's see. Wow. This is amazing. People from all over are represented. Hopeful. Not good. Yep. Increasing. Frustrated but hopeful. Concerned. Improving. Optimistic. Unsatisfied. Unsatisfied. Okay. Optimistic. We'll end on a happy note. Whether it's neutral, positive, negative, these are all valid responses, and really gives me hope that we all care, right? If you feel something about a certain topic, it means you care. All right, so what can you do right now? Learn more about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 5. Exercise your political rights to vote. Vote for governments that promote women's representation. Be an equal pay champion. Women earn 10 to 30% less than men for the same work. Call out gender discrimination online, in the workplace. Educate and empower the younger generation. They need to really grow up understanding, knowing, and believing in the benefits of gender equality. All right, so let's finish up this story with the last section. It's going to be really short, I promise, and it's only a couple lines. Stay informed on facts about gender and take action. So let's embed a website. And you can embed the website for it to show up interactively in your story. In this case, I wouldn't recommend it because there's this, people have to scroll and it feels a little bit too embedded. So I want to show this as a nice little card. This card automatically pulled in the title of the website and the description, but I can edit it and change the thumbnail. When your readers click on it, they go to that site and they can take action, they can learn more. And that's what all of this is about understanding. All right, so before I publish the story, I want to add some Google Analytics. And this is great. I love using this because I get to see who is coming to my story. Are they on mobile? Are they on desktop? What languages are they speaking? Stories can be created in over 30 languages. So maybe I need to look at the top 5 languages of my readers and translate the story into 5 different stories in 5 different languages, for example. I can see where in the world they're coming from. And you can publish the story privately to your organization, to everybody. I can start off just publishing it privately and then later changing it. I can share it with a group and we can edit the story together. So there's lots of ways to publish your story. All right, so now that my story is published, I'm ready to see in just the past 20 minutes what we've done with this story. We have a beautiful introduction. Hopefully it's catching people's attention. The video makes it more personal. It brings in people and voices and music. We have the map choreography that guides the reader to different parts of the world. We have what's important. How is gender equity impacting communities? What are the barriers? We had the swipe tools. Increasing representation. What can you do? We had a survey, 1, 2, 3, and many people's responses. And then how do you stay informed? So now I'm going to copy this, go to the StoryMaps competition, hit get started. And at the very bottom of this page, you can add your track. Are you a professional? Are you a student? Add your name, some other information like your email and your company. And at the very end, you paste in your URL and hit submit. It's very easy. I can't wait for all of you to create stories on SDGs. This is only one SDG 5. You can also create collections. Here we have Her Stories, collections of stories about women around the world in different languages, women of all races, all backgrounds, all beliefs. So this is, leave nobody behind, right? As Hindu said earlier. So quickly, I'm going to add my story that I just created, Women in Leadership, to this collection. Easily, you can add the story that you've created, found one from the Living Atlas, ones you favorited, and here's Women in Leadership, it's nicely shown at the bottom. And yeah, so you just saw in about 20 minutes, creating an SDG story on SDG 5. I can't wait, and the judges, I'm sure, can't wait to read all of your stories, to see how you're impacting your communities, what's going well, what's not going well. So thank you so much for your time, and I'll pass it back over to you, Dawn.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was absolutely fantastic. So as you can see, everyone, you have now received a nice introduction to ArcGIS StoryMaps in general from Alan. And then Liz took you through a high-level overview of actually using ArcGIS StoryMaps, the various tools and capabilities. And then Jennifer built a story map for you that is directly related to SDGs, exemplifying for you what you might build in order to enter the StoryMaps competition. So we would like to take the time now that we have, about 5-10 minutes, we're running a little behind, to have the StoryMaps team answer some of your questions. And there has been a lively interchange in both the chat and the Q&A. So we won't be able to get to all of the questions that you have, but I'm going to start with a couple of these and see how far we get. Now, there is one question that we have from Sadie. I know Sadie Newman was one of our Esri User Conference assistants. And her question is for Liz, Jennifer, and or Alan. All of you can chime in, or one of you or two of you. Do you have any suggestions about how to show the use of a layer that is not allowed to be made public? I'm working on a tech solution that requires city storm sewer data, and it's an important part of my story, but I can't display the true layer since the city I'm working with has not made their data public like some other cities have. So is it better to draw something general and just explain in the text that there is more to it? Or should I show the data from a different city that does make their data available?
Yeah, I'm afraid you don't have a whole lot of choice in terms of making that data available, other than to lobby with your local elected officials to see what they can do to make their data open. But I think, yeah, it might make sense to go to a city that does have similar data that's open and explain that this is an example of that kind of data, but not for the city that you're dealing with.
Great, thanks, Alan. And just a reminder that the chat is still going on, and some of the questions that you have are actually being answered in the chat. And of course, you'll want to revisit this recording, which will help you to find the answers to some of the questions that you have now or that may arise. Another good question comes to all of you on the team from Kevin Keene. He asks, do you have a list of resource libraries that can be used safely to avoid copyright breach?
Well, one place to go for map data is Esri's Living Atlas of the World, which has dozens, hundreds of authoritative maps that are freely available and accessible to use. For images, we like a site called Unsplash, which offers rights-free images, hundreds and hundreds of them, so some of them very handsome. You can also use a Google image search, and if you go into the settings, you can filter your search by images that are available via Creative Commons. So that's a few ways to go about it.
Mm-hmm. Very important tip. Thank you, Alan. There is another question. Cruz Gonzalez, he and I have been conversing in Spanish. My Spanish is horrible, so my apologies, Cruz. And I hope that you are still with us. We would like to highlight one of your questions. We're going to have to do it in English. Cruz asks, and Cruz is from Colombia, with respect to the maps, is it possible to do a social mapping with the community, with one's local community, that explores the problems that economic growth affects, how the lack of economic growth is affecting the development of the local community as part of his story for the contest?
Jennifer, you want to take that on?
Sure. So lack of economic growth, I would recommend checking out existing stories, going to arcgis.com and searching for maybe economic development, for example, or finding stories about the topic you're interested in. That's what I always do. And I can see examples of what I want to do and what I don't want to do. Now, in terms of data for your region, what I like to do is open a map, for example, in ArcGIS Online. And there's an option that says only show results in my location, like the extent of the view. So it'll show, and you can do the search and see what data is available. You can also contact your local government or local nonprofits for data. And lastly, in Living Atlas, there's an option to click on the dropdown and select your country and only view data relevant to your country. I hope that answers your question.
I just want to chime in briefly and say that there's often a chance to do some sort of participatory mapping where you make use directly of resources in your community. So as Jen did live, she used a survey 123 that had a geopoint question that tied responses directly to a map. So you can also source first-person narrative around particular issues from a community as well.
Excellent. Thank you, team. And this also gets to Cruz and Janine Hunter's comment about how Esri can support more story maps on topics outside of North America. I mean, this contest is all about that in terms of this is a global contest. And with story maps, we have people telling stories from all over the world. So this is not just for North America or North Americans. It is for the world community, and the output of stories from around the world is truly amazing. So please dive in and explore. I'm going to do one last question, and this I think is for Jennifer. Can you tell us more about the Factivism button used in the story map demo? The Factivism campaign featured in the story map was launched by Project Everyone, the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, and SDN Trends to spotlight the importance of timely data for the SDGs and profile the actions we can all take to advance progress. And there is a link that is being put in the chat about this. It's factivism.globalgoals.org.
Yes, that's a great question. So this is a great site to visit, factivism.globalgoals.org, and it talks about 10 facts to change the world, from hunger to a healthy planet. How do you take action with things like gender, air pollution, education, conflict? And it's all about that call to action. What can you do right now? And what can we encourage our governments to do? Yeah, great question.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you again to Alan, Liz, and Jennifer for this fantastic section of our webinar. Sorry, it's early in the morning here. This was terrific. It was also very helpful to those of us, I think, who have been using story maps. There's always a new feature. There's always something new that the story maps team is putting into the software. So it's great to keep up to speed on what is available for us to use in order to tell our stories. So now I'd like to use the remaining part of our time in this webinar to transition to Alex Tate for closing remarks. Along with Jeffrey, Hindu, and me, I'm so very pleased to introduce Alex, who completes our panel of 4 judges for this SDG Story Maps competition. Alex is an amazing cartographer. He leads the geopolitical and cartographic direction for the National Geographic Society. And prior to that, he worked at International Mapping Associates, providing expertise to international boundary disputes before world courts. He has participated also in a scientific expedition to Mount Everest, and his mapping Mount Everest ArcGIS story map takes you on a wonderful journey that discusses the critical roles of data, mapping, and GIS tools in that adventure. And we'll put a link to his mapping Mount Everest story map in the chat. But Alex, I'd like to hand over to you now for some closing remarks. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Dawn, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody who's on the webinar. I'd like to thank Dawn and all of her colleagues at Esri for helping organize this partnership between Esri, National Geographic, and the Sustainable Development Solutions Network to bring awareness to the Sustainable Development Goals. This competition around the story maps about the SDGs, as they're called, is doubly exciting to me. It's about better understanding and promoting the Sustainable Development Goals. They are vitally important, as my fellow judges have noted, as a blueprint for a peaceful and prosperous world. I liked Dawn's words on that. But it also involves geographic data and using geographic data to tell stories and having these stories reach an audience, reach people. And storytelling, as many of you know, is a sweet spot for National Geographic. We've been telling stories about our world for over 100 years. And most of those stories in our magazine or on our website or in videos, most of those stories use maps. So I'd like to make a few remarks about telling the world's important stories, stories that are based on the best geographic data, stories that are use the best maps, graphics, images, and videos, stories that have an impact. Like Alan, I have some tips. I don't want to use the term best practices. These are really suggestions. We want you to use your creativity. I call them advice or advisements. Some of them reach perhaps the level of exhortations. So take them all with a grain of salt. They build on some of the ones that Alan presented. And I hope you find some of these nuggets of advice useful. I am going to share my screen so that you can see. My presentation about this.
Great, we're seeing it, Alex. Thank you.
Okay, great. There was a little hiccup there on my side, so I'm going to present this. So here are my top 7. Alan has 9. I got down to 7. And one of the most important things is to make sure you have something to say. Focus on your message. Don't only put together impressive maps, photos, and videos, though do that as well, but really focus on the story. Create a consistent narrative. The SDGs are important. You're given a topic that will mean that your story map will have something important to say, but craft an individual story. Tell something that hasn't been told before. Craft the story. The SDGs Today website is a great spot to get inspiration. There are story maps. In addition to connections to lots of different data sets, there's connections to story maps. I'd like to highlight SDG 13, climate action. This was a story map that Alan highlighted in his presentation. I think it's exceptional. There are others there, and each of these takes a focus on something particular about an SDG. This one on melting glaciers in Greenland, I'm going to come back to. So number 1, make sure your story has something important to say. Number 2, who's it for? Think about your audience. Who's going to be reading this? Are you making it at the level of a primary school? Or is it for policymakers? Or is it just for the general public to inform about a sustainable development goal? This should be a key part of your planning and design for your story map. Number 3, a little planning goes a long way. So think about the stages or steps or chapters of your narrative, outline those so that you know where you're going to be going with your story. And it's important to do this prior to getting deeply involved in your data visualization and map making. I would suggest doing this once you have a firm idea of what your general theme is, outline it. Number 4, text really matters. I think as a cartographer and a graphics specialist, I always think about the images first. The text is vitally important in these story maps. Make sure it's concise, make sure it's clear, and make sure it helps support your theme and the story you're trying to tell. It really is the story in many ways, and many of the best story maps involve a very clear text that is illustrated by the other elements. It's tempting to spend all of your time on beautiful graphic elements. Make sure you give plenty of time to the writing and refining of the text. I'm going to repeat one of Alan's: focus on the flow, vary the pace, but keep your story moving. Some of these are real generalities, but I think they're good things to keep in mind. Some of it's just common sense in telling a story. Provide rests and small diversions, but I would say pet peeve of mine is some of these small diversions in a story map are actually very big diversions. Make sure you don't divert the reader too far away from the major thread of your story. Make sure all your elements support the story. By all means, use a variety of media, but sometimes fewer and stronger graphics, maps, photos, videos, fewer and stronger are better. My last one as a cartographer is an insistence on following cartographic best practices. This is really important. Make sure you do things like maximizing the data to pixel ratio. That means that if you're going to use up pixels on the screen, make sure that there's data there. Make sure that the data speaks. The data should rise to the top of your visual hierarchy. You shouldn't be distracted by streets or fancy imagery or shaded relief if that's not the message you're trying to convey. And there's others. There's some great websites out there, including some of the cartography information on the Esri website that give you information about this. So I think one of the important things is to see good examples. So I am going to switch over to show you a few that I really like, and hopefully they will inspire you. One is a story map that was developed by National Geographic explorer Paul Salopek and Alan Carroll's StoryMaps team about the river roads of India. Paul Salopek is on a many-year journey to walk around the world. And he started in Africa and currently is in South Asia. And this story map grabs you with a really intensive video and goes into some beautiful map making. One of the things I like about this story map is it allows you to go to an area of interest, perhaps the Brahmaputra River, and then you can find out information about that. And if we scroll down a bit, it then has a call to action, which is to learn more about the Out of Eden Walk and perhaps engage with Paul Salopek. I'm going to jump ahead to an interactive map on the National Geographic website. This one was not created using the StoryMaps tools, but it is a very similar style, and you can do many of these things, if not all of them, in StoryMaps. This is by my colleague Brian Jacobs about bird migration. Billions of birds migrate. Where do they go? And he takes you right into the star of the year, which is a broad-winged hawk, and where that hawk flies during its migration. It provides a greater context at a different scale of all of the Americas, and you can see the flight paths of all the major bird groups. And then I want to scroll down to an element that I find really exciting, which is that he brings in, of course, beautiful photography from National Geographic, full screen, so you can appreciate. This is one of the stars of the show as well. It is a wood thrush. And we can see what the wood thrush is doing in its migration right here. Hopefully this animation shows up for you. You can see the birds starting in Central America and flying to Northern North America. And if the animation doesn't work, or if you want more information about the migration, you get a little sidecar here that takes you step by step through the migration. But you can also continue to other birds. And I need to take a quick look. Are we still there? Yeah. Mapping Mount Everest, as Dawn mentioned, was a story map that I worked on with Alan and his team. And one of the most challenging parts was to do this planning of different chapters of the story and writing the text. So I spent a lot of time working on the text while Alan and his team were working on many of the graphics. And that combination of really focusing on the writing of the text and the story is an important part of building one of these story maps. So I'm excited to be part of the judging panel for the Story Maps competition with Dawn and Hindu, and shout out to Hindu, who's a National Geographic explorer, and Jeffrey Sachs. National Geographic is pleased to partner with Esri and SDSN to promote understanding and use of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So best of luck to all of you with creating your story maps, and I look forward to seeing what you create. All right, back to you, Dawn.
Thank you, Alex. We couldn't have ended on a better note there. Those were terrific tips and comments and insights. And I hope that everyone is super, super excited now about this competition, and also even more excited about story maps in general. So we encourage all of you to enter the Story Maps competition if you have not done so already. I'm sure someone will put, thank you, someone has already put in the chat, thank you, as many as put in the chat for you, the website where you can get all of the details about the 2020 ArcGIS StoryMaps competition for the Sustainable Development Goals. You have until 5:00 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time on November 25th to submit your entry. And the winners will be announced in February of 2021. And we will all be winners because we will have gotten through 2020 by then. And we thank you so much for attending this. Thank you to my great colleagues in the Sustainable Development Solutions Network who has made this webinar possible, to our colleagues at the National Geographic Society, and to my colleagues at Esri. This has been a fantastic session. Thank you also to all of our speakers, to my colleagues, the judges. This is going to be a recorded session that I know I will be going back to over and over again. Thank you again, and good luck with your story mapping.
Thanks, everybody.